What sound experience would you like today?
I'll have the fantasy pack.
Good choice.
And could you make it a Cloud 2 wireless?
On his way, sir.
Sounds amazing.
Hello, and welcome back to, well, you can guess it. It's Friday. You look at your calendar. It's that beautiful day up ahead, and it's Hearthstone Fridays, of course. And I'm joined here today with the lovely Mick. How's it going, brother?
It's going good, man. And the night's only going to get better as the longer I stick around here. So I'm excited to go ahead and get it started now and, roll everything out as the course of time rolls.
I mean, if it gets better the longer you stick around, then for you, you're going to be living at the end of the night because, well, Mick, he's going to be here pretty much the entire time to enjoy, to have your guys' company and, well, be around the entire time. But the first matchup we've got here today will be in the Challengers division, PieMonster versus Steve. What are your thoughts?
I'm excited for this. Looking at these guys' deck list and what they have to bring to the table, as well as where they stand in terms of just the overall bracket, I'm loving what these guys are going to bring to the table. I'm really excited to see what they have. Not as excited to see aggro decks because I'm never really a big fan of them, but I mean, it is what it is. You see the win rates. I mean, you know what these guys, they're going to throw them out eventually. So, besides that though, I'm going to have plenty of opportunity to see a lot of diversity tonight. So I'm hoping to just, start it off with a bang and see two great guys go at it.
No. I love me some two-guy action as well here on the Hearthstone broadcast. But I think this is already the moment where I admit directly where I am a aggro deck kind of guy. I just want to go fast, I just want to go speedy, and I want to get the matchup over as soon as possible. I want to know instantly whether I can win or lose, and that is what I like about aggro decks, and I can very much understand why people don't like it. But you talked about it a little bit already, the win-loss ratio and the records of the players. They're both currently 2-2, and it is incredibly close between the two. They've both lost in a game number 5 against Bognesty, who's currently 4-0. It's going to be such a great matchup here, and I really expect this to go all the way already.
Yeah, I'm on the complete same page as you. You know, looking at everything overall, I'm expecting this to be a huge matchup because of where they're placed overall. I mean, with how the amount of guys we got in the pool, they are going to be facing around. They're going to be throwing themselves around at different guys over the course of the game, regardless of what kind of, division they're in. But even then, that sits there at times, gives them something they're not usually used to. So maybe off meta decks, so maybe some budget things, just the usual stuff you wouldn't be so accustomed to. And I feel like that's the adaptability that Bognesty kind of brought during those matchups. So I feel like they're going to feel a lot more at home when it comes to these two guys facing off against each other, because, I mean, upwards in the ladder, you're going to see more likely the same thing over and over again, allowing yourself to adapt to it and learn them better, therefore making the matchups go a little bit longer and allowing them to know what's coming and what's being thrown at them.
Yeah, and as you get higher up in the ladder, you kind of see more serious decks as well, and people wanting to grind it really up there. And then we see Steve having a Corrupt Priest, a little bit of a meme deck, not really taking it as serious maybe as you potentially would expect. But then, well, yeah, the ban also on the side of Steve. So PieMonster banned the Token Druid out of Steve, and then Steve banned the World Kick Rogue out of PieMonster. Just wants to get that obnoxiety out of the way, and we all know that Token Druid can be such a nuisance to deal with.
Yeah, and I completely agree. But, I mean, all in all, when you really break it down, I'm surprised he went for the Token Druid ban, because usually if you don't get those right pulls in your opening hand, it feels like the game's just over from the start. So whenever you sit there and break it down, when you look at when you look at PieMonster's deck and Steve's deck, I mean, I could understand the bans or where they're coming from a comfort point of view, but from a statistical and from a point of just an overall kind of perspective of how exactly the games can play out, I feel like the Token Druid and the World Kick Rogue are really kind of interesting in a sense compared to what else is brought to the table here.
Yeah, no, exactly. A little bit of different things brought to the table. The matchup can be underway. We do have the Big Warrior versus Highlander Hunter underway as the initial one, and a decent start for the Highlander. Getting a little bit of pressure on the board already. The Wolpertinger and the Felmaw coming on board. We do see a decent hand for the Big Warrior, obviously looking to make it to that end game to really get those power turns out there, completely demolish your opponent, demoralize them, and just throwing something massive on the board.
Yeah, and I feel like with this whole matchup, if you get to those big turns and you give a chance for that Warrior to actually get these pulls, then Hunter's kind of just completely drowned out, because he's about, giving that sustained damage constantly up until around 10 mana, and then at that point he just falls off because you have so many cards in your hand, but yet they're all so cheap. It allows him to expend everything very quickly. So if he doesn't kill Warrior by about round 7 or 8, I feel like this is going to be done.
Yeah, Witsa told me something very, very currently for the current situation. It doesn't really matter what turn you do it, and as long as you kill the opponent before the turn they kill you, that all works out for an aggro deck at this point. And PieMonster, he's not really going to care too much about the Wrench Caliber coming out. Yes, it's a clear, but the bombs, I feel like if PieMonster does end up losing to bombs, he was probably in a spot where he was going to lose anyway, so he's not probably going to mind it too much. And well, the Highlander Hunter does have a very decent way of finishing of the game with a Dino Tamer Bran.
Yeah, and that is if he gets around to that draw, because with the fact of this deck not having too much draws in it, besides a Voracious Reader, you really don't have too much resources to deal with. You're burning a lot, and you're burning it a little bit too quickly, hoping to get everything done up front and forward. And once you miss that opportunity, and once that's kind of over with, you're kind of just locked out of that point. We do see him going ahead and trying to set up as best as possible. PieMonster giving the Divine Shield to the Imprison. But when you look at the likes of Warrior. He just has a lot of different deals of control within his deck to get him to those larger turns, and we already see a Coerce coming out here to go ahead and knock out that threat. So I feel like just overall, if these secrets don't get played, that's just wasted mana, and the fact is he's not going to get it. PieMonster's not going to get as much as he wanted to, and he's kind of going to get drowned out here fairly quickly, I'm seeing.
And we do see the pressure play coming out as well, which is potentially gearing up for that late game, knowing he's up against the big warrior for not having really played any minions early on. But at the same time, PieMonster, you can't really choose that slow of a play. You need to try and get the most tempo on the board. This is more of a base race instead of you trying to fend off, because, well, big warriors, not as if they've only got one big threat that they can throw down and then that's going to be it for the rest of the evening. You can go home after you've cleared that one out. No, there's more coming. It will be an absolute steamroll at that point, and now the freezing trap also coming out, not wasting any mana. It does have a, well, not really much of an option here. Nothing to really gain a lot of tempo. Maybe explosive trap for that, a little bit of damage. But then again, if your hero gets attacked, you're not in a great position already.
Yeah, and I completely agree. And I'm surprised at this point in the game, Warrior, I mean, he could basically lock this whole game out if he does pull by any chance of commencement. So, I mean, we're just kind of waiting for that turn 7, see what turns up. And if he sits there and gets it, I mean, he's already going to have a huge threat on board, whether it's Troublemaker, Deathwing, Rattlegore, you know, or a Scrapyard Colossus. All those are super big threats, and it could start the earlier, the luckier his draws are. But otherwise, he's going to be looking to be waiting pretty late for that Dimensional Rift or that Dimensional Ripper or a Troublemaker just to throw out right. I mean, with him only having one copy of most of these big cards, that's kind of where his biggest issue is. So if he doesn't pull that Rattlegore off the bat when it comes to any of those draws or summons, I mean, he's not going to get as much value up front because the rest of those threats can't really stick as well as Rattlegore.
Yeah, that is very true. And he uses the Maw of Cthulhu on a 2/2. Once I get that underway, which... it's a relatively decent option because, as well, as you know, with Highlander Hunter, you don't have that many massive threats except for, well, the Dino Tamer brand, which summons the 8A charge, the King Crush, of course. For the side of PieMonster right now, I think he's looking for Petting Zoo because he has 4 Seekers under control. Getting 4 3/3s, the roll will probably forced out, but at least it's a little bit of board pressure. Actually...
It's actually shocking to see the fact that Steve is already in a position where he's having to lock himself down, essentially. He's using so much resources, getting all this armor, and finding ways to buff out the damage already thrown at him, compared to just preparing for it ahead of the time and finding a way to prep himself for those later turns, because most of Hunter's spells apply for him trading minions into the opposers, or him just outright going for face or utilizing minions in some kind of way. So it's really shocking to see the fact that Steve isn't playing too much kind of armor or reinforcements in terms of hero power and looking more to just develop the board with his spells and just setting up that Cthulhu, albeit it's a great choice. But the fact is, at that point, if you go ahead and get Cthulhu main in your deck, then the match is most likely going to be over at that point. So it's really odd to see him going for this approach, which is a lot more slower, methodical, and playing for the late game. When you're facing the likes of a face hunter, Lord knows when you're actually going to get to that point.
Yeah, and we do see the Dino Tamer brand coming out as well, which will lead to lethal. He can armor his way out of it, but he still would need to clear the board, and then you have kill command hero power next turn. It's not looking good for PieMonster, or for Steve. I do apologize right now. He did draw pretty decent to clear off the threats. Well, it doesn't really matter if the threat is in the opposing hand, and then you would need a completely different set of cards to try and deal with that. He just doesn't currently have that. Yes, he can put something on the board as a Troublemaker. He obviously doesn't know that a Dino Tamer brand is there, but I think this one is pretty over.
Yeah, and it's actually really interesting and shocking to me to see the fact that Hunter was able to pull this out with him focusing mostly on these secrets and finding ways to clear out these threats. I mean, it's actually paying off for him, and, props to him for it, because overall, I mean, the only chance that Warrior has right now is really just, as you said, finding a way to clear that board, get rid of those threats, and still maintain a way to survive Dino Tamer brand. But, I mean, at this point in the game, if you don't have the likes of a commencement, you're not going to have enough protection against that. And I'm sure that's exactly what Steve was looking for. So you have those aggro decks that are looking to have those one draws, have that huge curve in that early aggro. I mean, Steve, he wasn't asking for too much to try and get just a single commencement by turn 7, but it's super unfortunate that it didn't get around to come to him. And I mean, from the looks of it, he's going to have 2 more matches to do that. But for right now, he's probably going to face this Wrath right quick and get this game over with.
Yeah, PieMonster doesn't want to let any extra turns go over this one because he does know about that commencement as well. But to be fair, I wasn't really paying that much attention to Steve's life totals, and at some point I looked up as PieMonster was going first. I was like, wait, he's on 13 health. He's currently doing a lot of damage all of a sudden, bringing the Dragon Bane out, a hero powering in the same turn. That's 7 damage straight to the face. Just slowly grinding him down can be a little bit unexpected.
Yeah, and it's just really odd to see how Warrior didn't win that matchup, because when you saw the fact that, you know, PieMonster was mostly going for these secrets and the ways to set up for the late game, it's almost shocking to see that he had enough resources to actually establish himself on board in the early game while not focusing on those secrets and allowing himself to set himself up for later, but yet still maintaining enough damage to get on to face to create that threat for Warrior where he was stuck in a position where he couldn't retaliate. So, I mean, the odds were most likely against Hunter's favor once it hit that turn 5, but the fact that he got such good draws, like when it came to that legendary for him, I mean, overall, just the fact he had a brand, and he also had, at one point, he sat there and got the Dragon Bane out. I mean, that's huge for him.
Yeah, and Hearthstone is a game of RNG. We already talked about it a little bit preemptively. We also always have that moment where, well, you see the hand, the RNG has already happened. He's going to kill him directly. He's going to bring lethal on the board, and now we do see the token druid coming out. The big warrior still staying on, wanting to get a win with that. No commencement in the hand just yet. Plenty of turns to try and draw it to fend off the attack. If token druid can really get going, it is going to be a scary, scary match for him. And well, this is a decent start for it, to be fair.
Yeah, especially with the way he has everything lined up, and if he can just find a way to maintain these minions on till turn 4, that Soul the Forest is going to be a huge kicker for him. But Warrior, if he finds a way to, you know, maintain that, if he has a minefield at any point in time or a blade storm, I mean, that basically just ruins the whole kind of momentum you have going on this board and what you're trying to get going. I mean, because when you look at it, that's really Druid's whole gist of Token Druid, is trying to find a way to get on the board, establish yourself, buff those minions as quick as possible, and just keep going. So if he doesn't find a way to retaliate that and clear all those threats out quickly enough, then it's going to be over. But he's going to have a little bit more to work with here. The fact that, I mean, PieMonster just drew a Dreamway Guardians. Those are 2 healths, and if he did pull a Bladestorm by any chance, they would still leave those on the board. But Steve does have something to actually clear those out and allow himself to buy a couple more turns here.
And it's smart to go for the sword and board initially to clear out the 2/2. Because you can say, well, there's 1/1 with the who just creates itself again every single time. But he knew overload, so there's no threat really on the board as of now. I can just wait for it. There won't be a turn coming from PieMonster. And this is the thing about Token Druid. He already needs to start top decking. Currently, he doesn't really have that, or well, he has 2 cards in his hand. He's got really nothing to set up Soul of the Forest. You need a board for it, Lunar Eclipse. You need something decent in the hand. So he does have the ability to try and almost make the comeback, I want to say. It's going to be tough, though.
Yeah, especially with how much he has to do with hand. He doesn't have the board anymore to get the full value out of Soul of the Forest. And when you're stuck in this kind of position, I mean, you really just have to rely on this nature studies. And as we see, he just made sure to immediately get that down because he knows how crucial it is. I mean, in this kind of situation where you see PieMonster, excuse me, having, you know, all these options for him are pretty good. They establish more either cards in hand or threats on the board. But issue is with the totems, that's going to have to be 2 turns he waits out for this. And that's time he's killing and letting Warrior possibly get an upper hand on him. But for right now, he's going to try and sit there and get more into his hand. Unluckily, you know, not exactly what he needs though, because he can get those Dreamwave, but if Warrior has a Blade Storm next turn, I mean, that's just an easy clear for the man.
And he doesn't need that Blade Storm then. Because otherwise, well, he top decks it. Sure, why not? Why not? Can't play around a top deck, huh? And that is going to be so incredibly tough to deal with. Otherwise, we would have seen a little bit of a power turn. Now we do see more of a setting up turn for PieMonster once again. Token Drew, you can only do a limited amount of setting up until you're just in position where you cannot come back anymore. He needs a strong turn.
Yeah, and it's really unfortunate for PieMonster here how we set up so much. He used so many spells already to establish himself on the board, hoping each one of those would stick. But Steve has pulled just enough in order to keep himself alive at this point, because we can see from PieMonster's hand, it's nothing but buffs really at this point. Besides Arbor Up, you don't only want to just apply that buff to the 2 Trance you get off of that spell, but you want to make sure it gets on the rest of the minions as well that you've summoned, you know, before this turn. But Steve has just had an answer to every single one of them, top decked or not, and it's put him in a situation where PieMonster has nothing really to play with. I mean, at this point in the game, he could only really Arbor Up and Power the Wild to get any threats on the board, and those are utilizing what you would usually use for buffs instead, just to actually get something to buff, which is a much more unfortunate place to be in compared to where you would usually hope to sit at.
And that goes all back to that start of the game. Well, he has a decent board now. It's probably going to get clear though, where he played the Gibberling and their Adorable Infestations, being incredibly aggressive, even though he just played against the big warrior deck, so he does know it's a little bit more of a defensive deck. It just wants to hold back here. And that's a decent draw, because as you see, every minion on the board is 3 health as well. This is not looking good for PieMonster in any way, shape, or form.
Yeah, that's just kind of the way the look of the draw goes. You sit there, you get some good games like he did with that Hunter, and sometimes you get some bad games where you wish instead of taking face damage right there, that bully, he hits both of your minions on board, which you just spend 7 mana to put down on. So, you know, in this kind of situation, especially with how he just utilized his 2 of his last 3 real establishments for the board, instead he had to use them and he got cleared out that easily. I mean, I don't see him finding too much to survive at this point, because Bully's going to put 6 damage onto the man, as well as putting down 2 3/3s at the end of the turn, plus with the weapon that Hunter has, or with Warrior has right now. I mean, that's 15 damage alone right there. And if he doesn't find something the next turn, he's not going to have enough time to buff it besides that, therefore not giving him really too much of an opportunity. So if PieMonster doesn't find anything super miraculous right now, it's looking like the game's going to be just as quick, but with the reverse outcome.
And he could have a somewhat of a strong turn the next time if he does manage to top deck Glowfly Swarm. But then you see the amount of pressure and damage on the board. Glowfly Swarm isn't going to cut it at this point. I think there's lethal on board, and indeed there is. So you need taunts and everything. It does draw the Glowfly Swarm, ends up playing as well, but we all know it doesn't matter since he won't be able to clear anything out. This is 1-1 right now.
Yeah, and you know, when you're in these situations, you wish there was something you could say, something you could do to give yourself a living, breathing chance to keep fighting. But I mean, with Warrior having one game where he didn't draw a single commencement, and now in this game where he draws 2, it almost feels like karma's coming back to bite PieMonster. I feel like he got away a little bit too easily when it came to that Hunter deck, and now it's just coming back to him. But both of those decks will be knocked out now. We're not going to see any more Big Warrior when it comes to Steve's side. We're not going to see any more Face Hunter when it comes to PieMonster's side. So I feel like at this point, when we're looking at the rest of these decks until Token Druid gets brought up by PieMonster again, overall, it's going to be looking like a lot more skill matchup based on, instead of rather hoping that you get those right draws off the point, because of the fact of how much survivability and lifesteal there is, and just overall heals that are in the rest of these decks.
I do see that is one thing that kind of worries me, is the Corrupt Priest still having to come in from Steve. He needs to get a win with that on the board, and well, in this format in Conquest, your best deck is just as strong as your weakest deck in theory, because otherwise you won't end up winning the series. I don't know about it. I mean, it could take a win against Ram Paladin if Ram Paladin doesn't draw the right card, but at the same time, it is a rough position that Steve is still in.
Yeah, and usually Paladin will run the likes of Consecration. So if he top decks that or even maintains an opening hand, knowing that they're going to be going up against a Druid, you're most likely going to see Steve holding on to that and making sure to get the most out of it, because overall, he knows just from seeing PieMonster's draws last game, if he can get those clears fairly early, then he's going to be sitting at a really good spot overall, especially when you also have Libram of Justice. I mean, that's such a strong card alone, combined with the likes of something like a Wild Pyromancer, which isn't exactly in his deck. He does have the Consecration. So, I mean, if you had a Pyromancer, it'd open up a little bit more options for you. But overall, I mean, he's going to sit there and be looking for that and making sure to keep it, because he knows exactly what PieMonster's running at this point, and he's going to try and shut that down once again.
Yeah, and he needs to shut it down, because if he gets too many threats on board, I don't know though. I don't know. We see a Libram of Justice in the hand already, so all health can be changed. We know that there needs to be a board built that actually is able to stick even after it dies, which can be completed with Soul of the Forest. For that, you need more than just being able to play it from hand, because it costs 4 mana, and this start coming out of the Libram Paladin, it's not really looking good for the token, because, well, he has already opportunities to clear, and you need a little bit of time to build a board.
Yeah, I completely agree. It looks like Paladin in this case is beating Druid in his own game. I mean, Druid's all about establishing yourself on board, utilizing spells to build threats, and get yourself to be a huge, overwhelming force by about turn 5 or 6. But, I mean, Paladin drawing that first day of school and already finding ways to clear out threats to get thrown down on the board, I mean, that's not a good situation to be stuck in. I mean, we're going to see PieMonster throwing out bees right here, but that's only going to knock out one thing. Paladin still has a 3/3 on board and 1/1, so he can trade 2 of those out and still find a way to possibly manage to going forward to find a way to trade out some more. So overall, I mean, just it's super unlucky for PieMonster to be dealing with these draws on the side of Steve right now, because I mean, the opening hand for him, especially knowing the likes of Pure Paladin, which ramps over the course of the game to have such a strong start, I mean, what can you do about that necessarily?
Yeah, well, Steve just has the perfect hand. He got a little bit lucky, obviously, with the first day of school, getting so much pressure. And then you also see 2 consecrations in the hand of Steve already. I never want to call it over already very early on, but let's just say Token Druid is currently in a dark alley where Batman's parents also walked, and it's not looking great.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. I mean, overall, right now, he does get down the Glowfly Swarm, but I mean, a Consecration is an easy clear of that right now. And I'm sure that's exactly what Steve is looking at, and he's going to throw it out and say, okay, do it again. I dare you. Yeah. Go ahead and throw out another board, because it seems like I got all the solutions right now. So going forward, I mean, that's exactly my whole ordeal when it comes down to these aggro decks, is you're purely relying on the opening hand. I mean, and you can always be beating your own game necessarily. I mean, with Steve having both of these consecrations, clearing out both Glowfly Swarms, if I'm in PieMonster's shoes right now, I am questioning reality as a whole.
Yeah, you saw the opening hand from PieMonster. 2 Glowfly Swarms, a lot of spells in the hand. You say, oh, easy game for PieMonster, no matter the matchup. Well, unless you're against a Paladin with 2 Consecrations in the hand, who just completely and utterly demoralizes you and demolishes your board every time you get it started. He didn't really have a way to actually reinforce it. If he had a way to actually build up a little bit of health, aka draw the Innervate 1 turn earlier instead of the Soul of the Forest, being able to buff it to 3, that would have been a perfect decision, countering the Consecration coming in and actually having a little bit of a board to do something with it. But I think currently PieMonster is in an unrecoverable position.
Yeah, I completely agree, because overall, I mean, in this stage of the game, you would hope that any of those minions stuck at all to be able to trade out. But Paladin has some buff threats on the board, you have no direct ways. You don't have a lunar eclipse to deal with either one of those threats. And if you throw anything down on the board like a Gibberling and utilize those spells to create more of them, I mean, Paladin can just straight up ignore you at this stage. He can go face and he can end the game with you sitting at 9 health. So, I mean, really, what can you do in this situation is the real deal, because overall, I mean, next turn, he's going to be looking really peachy if he can find a way to pull this out. But with the way Steve's luck's gone so far, I mean, I doubt he does.
Yeah, and he might just be facing. I don't think there's any direct attack, or well, you have the 1/4 weapon or in Libram of Justice, but apart from that, wait, actually, is there lethal 5, 7, 8? He's one of lethal currently. And still, it's just a terrible position. And PieMonster actually going for the lifesteal, wanting to try and recover himself in this match. Could just draw lethal on the side of Steve here. We're going to have to see what comes out. That is not going to be lethal just yet, but still, well, we've said it many times. PieMonster, he needs to connect those lifesteals to the face. He does have a Savage Roar to massively heal. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, that's just a lot of math, and by the time we add it up, it's probably already going to be executed. So I'm not going to waste your time or any of the audiences when it comes down to that, because when you look at a 4/6 and a Savage Roar in hand, you allocate 2 minions to trade that out, and with the amount of buffs in hand, I mean, he's going to have 8 mana to do it next turn. He's going to have the Arbor up and a Savage Roar. I mean, I feel like PieMonster at this point, he may actually have something going for him.
Yeah, he just might. He just might. The clears are out because there's no synergy anymore with Libram of Justice and Consecration. He just needs to figure something out as this massive turn will come out. The Savage Roar as well, so a lot of heal for PieMonster. No perfect trades whatsoever. It hurts a little bit to be trading 2 minions into that. He could actually decide to go face since he still has 12 heal on the board as well to try and regenerate. Keep that minion pressure, and I think that's a pivotal part right now. Keep that minion pressure in there, otherwise you're throwing away too much board.
Yeah, and it's actually really interesting he opted for the Savage Roar here, because when you really look at it, the damage is important and all, and no way to trade out your minions, but when you're stuck in this situation where you need to trade out your minions, you need to find a way to keep the board continuously to build pressure. And when you have a Soul of the Force in your hand, I mean, why not just utilize that, save your Savage Roar for later, and then when you have these 6 minions dying off from being traded out, knowing he doesn't have a Consecration in hand anymore, you can use that Savage Roar next turn and have most likely a guaranteed lethal. So it's an interesting avenue he took to, you know, approach that turn right there. But, I mean, with the likes of Paladin, you see he's going to throw that down, and if you throw down Spirit of the Force, is probably going to be his move this time around. You're not going to get as much value out of it, being you've already thrown away a minion for it.
Yeah, I mean, maybe it was just a little bit scared of being low health and thought, okay, as much on the lifesteal as possible. I think he's currently looking whether he can actually get lethal. I mean, he's getting relatively close with the Savage Roar coming out. That will give his hero power to attack as well without using the hero power. Does he have lethal? I mean, once again, yeah, by the time we've calculated it, it'll already happen. But I think it, indeed, no. No, he has not. He currently has 18 on the board.
Sitting real high and mighty earlier in the game, and now you're in a situation where you have to flip the tables once again. I mean, I'm just not exactly sure how Steve is reacting to this behind his computer right now. Me, to be completely fair and honest, I'd be pretty ticked to know that I have the likes of a really annoying token druid on lockdown. I have him sitting at 9 health, and I can about clear this guy out, and he finds a way and gets the draws to totally flip this game on its head. I mean, how do you sit there and deal with that? But going forward, I mean, even if Steve does lose his matchup right here, I'm sure he's going to be more than happy to say, okay, well, at least that's out of the way. Going forward, I know this is going to be a skill-based matchup, and all his aggro's kind of, you know, done for.
Well, that's the thing with Token Druid, that sometimes you have a handful of buffs, and sometimes when you have a board build up, you draw the buffs and are actually able to create such massive pressure. Those Dryads, they sticked on for so incredibly long. I'm not able to deal with them. You see the health total getting higher and higher, and at some point, you just kind of know from, if you're Steve, that it's over for you as well. You use both consecrations, you're sitting there not being able to clear out the board, even though you had a Libram of Justice, you had a way to decrease the health total to 1, you had no way of dealing 1 damage, and that hurts.
Yeah, and that's usually in those situations. I mean, the Libram of Wisdom there is usually for like another, pure paladin per se, to find a way to get rid of those buffs, find a way to clear those minions out and put them on an even playing field, or usually in the case an advantage playing field where they all have 1 health and you have more at least. So overall, the fact is, when you're going against the likes of a token druid, you're not going to be getting that much of a discount. And if you're not running the likes of a Lord Barov or something else that deals damage size 2 consecrations, I mean, you have to use his early game, as we saw. He had to go ahead and get those minions off the board. He had to clear out those glowfly swarms, or it was going to be over for him in a turn much earlier than when it already did. So maybe going forward, he's going to consider that and say, maybe this time around I should run a Lord Barov or just anything that does more damage. Because when you look at the meta and you look at how all these players are competing and the decks are bringing into these competitions, it's interesting to see what they're doing, and it really helps you adapt your deck on a week-to-week basis.
And especially with Libram having a card generation in the late game in the sorts of Light Force Crusader, you really can still build a board later on, so opting to clear it out earlier. And I thought I was frantically looking for that clear out as well in his deck, and there was just nothing apart from the consecrations that he has already used. But hey, that's now in the past. He needs to move on, we need to move on. So we see the priest coming out, the corrupt priest, a little bit of a meme deck coming out, and he's up against a Ram Paladin. Ram Paladin is also a little bit of a deck that, if you get a strong draw, it's pretty much unstoppable.
Yeah, but I mean, as a memester myself, I love this corrupt priest deck. I gotta say, I've played it on ladder. I've had a fair amount of success with it, and I purely enjoy it with the fact of how much resource generation it has and how much you can actually get just from all those discover abilities. Overall, I feel like if he sits there and draws, a plague or something of the likes of that, it's such an easy clear for him to not only knock out the silence, but knock out just the minions as a whole, because this deck doesn't exactly establish too strong of a board until the late game, and it's easy to buff out with the likes of any kind of thing that plays out the corrupt, because of how cheap it makes cards, how influential and big it makes them, to where you can utilize 2 mana for an endless corrupted card. And those horrendous growths, they have infinite capability to them. So just for the fact of 2 mana, you could throw out maybe a 14/14. Paladin would want to probably use most of his hand to deal with that, and if you have a second one, it generally feels over at that point. So overall, especially with the Yasharaj, there's a lot for this priest to work with.
And there's a lot indeed, but I'm looking through the deck right now, and I don't see a Plague of Death, which it's not a real big board clear coming in. So that is what I'm wondering, how Corrupt Priest is going to deal with those massive threats if Ram Paladin manages to get a tip the skills on the board, for example. There's one Holy Nova. Well, you
got to keep in mind at this point, with looking at Priest's pool, he doesn't have as many buffs in his pool anymore. He has a lot of control. So when you're using, I'm sure this is exactly what he's looking for. Steve is looking for those Hysterias to use. He's using and looking for that palm reading. He's trying to look for those, the renews as well. He's trying to get as much out of those as possible, because there's so many discover effects that's in the priest pool as well. I mean, if this man just gets lucky with at least 2 cards, he could get infinite value out of it, especially with having Galakron at turn 7. If Paladin isn't too crazy at that point, he definitely has a fighting chance.
And we see the Soul Mirror coming out. So any board that's going to come out will be instantly matched by said Soul Mirror, which, the earliest it could be right away if he does manage to draw it early on the side of on the side of PieMonster. Priest has a little bit to work with. Bone Wraith coming out, blocking potential damage coming in, and most importantly, for that Bone Wraith, it doesn't kill off the red skill Dragon Tamer instantly, so he has a little bit of time to work with before it comes out.
Which I feel like that's a perfect situation for Steve to be sitting in, because when the red scale won't die, that's a possible dragon that he's not going to be getting, because I mean PieMonster is running a Nozdormu in this deck, so theoretically these red scales could draw that, go ahead and set him up for 10 mana, and then allow him to get the Carnival Clown down, the Dark Moon Rabbit, the Scrapyard Colossus, all these big threats he has in hand. They're kind of useless unless he draws that Nozdormu. So the fact that Bone Wraith only has 2 attack, meanwhile Red Scale has 3 health, it's really just a perfect median to look for because of how much he can heal. He can buff out most of the damage that's done by them, if not all of it.
And the only thing is, if he does end up drawing that Nozdormu, obviously that sends both players to 10 mana. And then you see 2 Soul Mirrors in the hand of Steve, a perfect way to deal with Carnival Clowns, with whatever will be coming out. And then we do see the Nozdormu, which might just be played directly here off the get-go. And indeed, send both players to 10 mana. This is where we probably will see the Steve Soul Mirrors coming out. Obviously not this turn, probably in the next one though.
Yeah, and really depending on what he likes to throw down, because he's going to have to throw down that Dark Moon Rabbit or that Scrapyard Colossus in order to give him a chance to get that Carnival Clown corrupted. Because if you don't have that card corrupted, I'll be real with you, the value on it's terrible. But once you sit there and maintain to get yourself a 10 mana on the board or find a way to spend that 10 mana, it becomes just an insane card. But without those buffs that you usually see in like a Clown Druid, I mean, it's not going to be as useful. The fact that the stats line up exactly with each other and become an exact copy in terms of attack and health, it allows those easy clears for Soul Mirror, and Priest has plenty of answers for that right now.
And is there any way we see the skills coming out? A little bit of Murloc action coming on here, just to get a random draw, because we do see that Crab Rider that's currently on the board. That doesn't trade perfectly.
No, it doesn't. But whenever you do sit there and consider those tip the scales, I mean, that's a Priest. He's running a Holy Nova as well, so he has plenty of potential that comes down with that. And I'm wondering, actually, probably not. No, he doesn't. I was going to say, usually Priest can run like 1 or 2 big dragons in this deck, which would really have benefited. Priest could have gotten a great draw off that red scale, but he's not seeming to be running any dragons in this deck. Therefore, he's not getting as much value as Paladin would be.
There is the scales, a lot of pressure on board right now. And one Soul Mirror actually used early on. I didn't necessarily expect that to be happening. I said not this turn, it will be in the next turn. Now he's kind of in a position where he might just have to use that second Soul Mirror to look and clear it out. And only then, well, then you're already in a position where you have a lot of other pressure coming in there of the Carnival Clowns. It hasn't been corrupted though, the Carnival Clown. That is a positive.
Yeah, and I feel like that's probably what he's waiting for. I feel like Priest is going to try and find a way to buff out this damage as best as possible, but not exactly throw down that second Soul Mirror because of how huge of a card that is. So if he can find a way to nullify this damage, find, possibly like a group silence. Ooh. He's actually not going to opt to look for anything. He's going to go ahead and just settle with this trade and run that second Soul Mirror. I don't know how I feel about this.
Yeah, no, neither, because, well, I mean, from his side, it might make sense. Or is he actually going to silence as well? He's going to silence.
Wow.
But, oh my word, he doesn't want that McGurgle Prime whatsoever. And this is a bit of a mad one.
Wow. Throwing down the Massive Spell after the Soul Mirror when you know he's got a bunch of big cards. I'm at a loss of words for the ideology behind that, because you could have sat there and thrown that down so much later. You could have thrown that Massive Spell this turn, made all those Murlocs do relatively just 8 to 9 damage as a whole, because of the fact that they don't do that much damage in terms of stats alone. And this Paladin, or at least this version of it, doesn't run that many buffs. So if you could have just mass dispelled, you would have locked out his board with it being completely full with a bunch of relatively useless Murlocs. And as long as you have a big threat on board, he's going to have to find a way to kill his own minions to out-tempo you, because with the fact that Precious has so many big threats, he can throw down one thing and it would counter his whole board. But instead, opting to clear everything out and opening up that space for these bigger minions to corrupt that Carnival Clown, probably not the best idea in rear view.
And that is only something that Steve might just figure out later. This could be a learning experience. He could also just get away with it. He could also just manage to get enough going, as we do see the horrendous growth coming out. Only a 9/9, so not quite as big as was mentioned earlier. And there come the Carnival Clowns. It's going to be a rude awakening for Steve here to see PieMonster come out with a massive board now.
Yeah, I mean, when you're in the shoes right now of Steve, I mean, I wouldn't really know what to be saying. It is interesting though to me how PieMonster didn't want to get that full value out of the Carnival Clown. I think that was an easy trade of the Scrapyard Colossus right there into that horrendous growth to allow him some time to actually get another Carnival Clown, but yet still get the damage off to trade into that horrendous and get it weak enough to where one clown is all it's going to take in order to trade it out, which you generated off killing that, you know, that second incantation of the Scrapyard Colossus. So lots of kind of plays here. You know, maybe in the competitive setting, I can understand you can get, you know, scuffled up a little bit and in your own head, but I mean, overall, looking at a lot of these plays, it's just has me questioned a lot.
And especially with Hysteria coming out, you would have loved to see that 7/7 away out of your board, trading with two minions, obviously dying itself in the process as well. It's Steve. Or on both sides now, there have been questionable plays. It's just all about who deals with them better, as Apotheus comes out early. 11 health or 11 life steal when he's at 28. I don't know, maybe you should keep that a little bit later to try and regenerate something. As you know, a lot of damage will probably be coming in. Currently that 11A is not going to deal or not going to do as much, as it could just also be traded out by the Dark Moon Rabbit.
Yeah, I completely agree overall. I'm just kind of confused of why he's not going to get the full value out of this. I understand you want to go ahead and pop the effect off with that, you know, set the Veil Weaver, but it's not that important overall right now. You're not going to generate anything too monumentous when there's not much of a threat to really deal with. I understand you're trying to set up for later turns if he was to develop a big board again, but, you know, 3 Carnival Clowns and 1 Wand Maker, and with how expensive most of his hand is, you don't have too much to stress about. So it's interesting that he goes ahead and opts for that, only getting 1 hit after he had to train to it twice. That was a theoretical 22 health right there from those 2 trades, but meanwhile he only got 2 out of it.
Yeah, exactly. It's just from both positions a little bit odd right now, as the phase of Dragonet comes out of Steve, you know, wanting to buff it up that a little bit. It's a big board coming in, or well, 14-14 basically. It's not really that incredibly hard to deal with if you have a Dark Moon Rabbit and then put every other damage to face. Yeah, you would have loved to have the lifesteal now, but you don't have anything on board. You're desperate for healing as you're on 2 health. I think Steve might just be finished.
Yeah, and I'm on the same page as you right here. I mean, what can you do in a situation like this? You don't have a Plague of Death to deal with it. If you do, you have another Scrapyard Colossus to try and deal with in the next turn. There's just too much in the hand of PieMonster right now, and too much on the board overall for him to really deal with any of this. I mean, you sit there in rear view as well. That also can make you really consider, should I throw down the Galakron? Going ahead and allocating 7 mana just to clear 1 minion in a board of 4/4s. I mean, how much value are you exactly going to get out of that? So when you really break it down, I mean, this is great. He's finding a way to survive, but it still just doesn't seem like it's going to be enough with how much, as I said earlier, that PieMonster has in hand, how much direct damage and threats he has, and just finding an easy trade here and when he has so much else that he can throw down later.
And that is going to cost Steve dearly indeed. The plays from earlier on do come back to bite him, turning it into a learning experience. Because also, this is kind of the same with procrastinating. As long as you procrastinate, you do manage to deal with it in the end. You're not really going to stop doing it. So Steve, he now got punished. He got shut down for his plays, and that is going to be a 3-1 victory for PieMonster, edging out his direct competitor.
Yeah, and from the likes of it, it was a good matchup, albeit how we usually called it out, but just not in a way that we expected. I expected these games to be long, drawn out, lots of huge decision making to be made overall. But yet it just seemed like the hands were just overall, as usual, the big kind of establishers of what was going on today. I mean, you see these guys, there would be times so much where it almost seemed like one man was unfavored, but yet the tides turned so quickly for them. I mean, referring to that token druid game specifically, and there was so much back and forth in terms of how quickly Lady Luck shifted her favorite player in this situation. So overall, I mean, fun to watch, but really, I mean, RNG is just kicking today, man.
I always love me some RNG. I'm a big fan of when it happens, some ridiculous things on the board, and all of a sudden the entire matchup gets flipped. And well, you kind of have that long grindy game of Hearthstone where you just grind out the opponent, shut down every threat, and kind of have that usual game. This is a little bit more high flying, as much action as you can get in Hearthstone. This was certainly one of those series more than a usual one. But with that, we're going to head into a tiny little break, set up the next match, and we'll see you back in a little bit.
What sound experience would you like today?
I'll have the fantasy pack.
Good choice.
And could you make it a Cloud 2 wireless?
On his way, sir.
Sounds amazing.